Hi everyone. I wanted to talk to you today about something that I think you're going to find really helpful, not just for writing the current paper that you're writing for me in Comp 1, but anytime you write any academic paper for the rest of your college career. I want for you to think about when you're using a quote or when you're using a paraphrase. A quote is a direct quote that you've taken in the author's own words. A paraphrase is an idea that you've taken, you've put it in your own words and your own structure, but it's still not your idea. So anytime you use a direct quote or a paraphrase in a paper of yours to support your writing, to support your points, I always want you to use what I call a quotation sandwich. Quotation sandwich, and I would like for you to go ahead and draw this little sandwich, excuse me, in your own notes, and then fill it in as we go through. Anytime you use a direct quote or a paraphrase, I always want you to have a sandwich around it, a top piece of bread and a bottom piece of bread. Because just like when you're building a sandwich in your real life, if you don't have a top piece of bread, your hands get messy, they're touching lettuce, they're touching mustard, they're touching meat. You don't want that. If you don't have a bottom piece of bread, everything falls on the floor. Without having the top piece of bread and the bottom piece of bread around your direct quote or around your paraphrase, your writing is going to be really messy. Your ideas are not going to come through the way you want them to come through. So, how to build this quotation sandwich? Well, you got some helpful hints by reading chapter 3 of They Say, I Say. Excuse me, if you haven't done that, I want you to make sure that you do that as soon as possible. So you're reading articles, you're reading essays, and those are the theme of what we're talking about right now, food, what we eat, why we eat it. But then we're also reading the how-to, the kind of bare bones. We're reading the chapters that are telling us how to make an argument, how to use quotations. So make sure you're doing that reading as well, staying on top of that, because that's really going to provide you with what you need to be successful in this course. So let's get back to quotation sandwiches. How do I do this? I know now I'm convinced I need a top piece of bread, I need a bottom piece of bread, or I have messy hands, I have lettuce and tomatoes on the floor. So what do I do? What do I put in that top piece of bread? What do I put in that bottom piece of bread? That's what I want to talk to you about today. And remember, anytime you use any direct quote or any paraphrase in your college writing, in any academic writing, I always want you to use a quotation sandwich. Any and every time you have a direct quote or a paraphrase, I want you to build a quotation sandwich around it. So I picked a sample quote for us to work with today. And this is going to be a little bit different because we don't have a topic sentence, we don't have a paragraph, we don't have the structure, so this is kind of a fake example in a vacuum. But just bear with me, I think that it will be more useful than nothing at all. So I have my quote, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. I can see that my O needs to be filled in here. So I have that quote from Michael Pollan, and I want to use that in my paper. So here it is. Anytime I use a quote or a paraphrase in a paper, I have to build a quotation sandwich around it. So I need a top piece of bread first. Let's talk about the top piece of bread. What comes before my quote or before my paraphrase? Now notice this is a direct quote. This is Michael Pollan's exact words, so I've put the quotation marks around it. So that's step number one. If you're using a direct quote, you have to have that quotation mark before your quote. You have to have that quotation mark after your quote. If you're using a paraphrase, you do not use the quotation marks. So, top piece of bread. Before I have this quote from Michael Pollan, what do I need to do? Well, I have to do something. That's what I learned over here. I have to have a top piece of bread. What goes in my top piece of bread can vary, and you can vary that up throughout your paper so that your structure doesn't get repetitive. So here are some ideas. Here's some things you can start writing in your sandwich. Some things that can be your top piece of bread. So number one, we need to know who's talking. That might be the person's actual name. You might choose to use his or her name before your quote, or I tend to recommend not doing that because I think that you can probably prepare your reader better by explaining who this person is. So you might want to give the credentials, give the reason for the credibility of the author. So, for example, Michael Pollan is really famous. He's quite a famous researcher, quite a famous writer about nutrition issues. And you know that you don't even have to do the outside research. The excerpt in They Say, I Say gives you a little bit of information about, pardon me, about the author. And so you know that he's a famous researcher, a famous writer, and he's written lots of books. You get that information from They Say, I Say. So you might go ahead and give the information about the author's credentials. Who are they? Why do we care that they're speaking? A little bit of their background, perhaps, if it's relevant. So, for example, here, I'm going to give you an example top piece of bread. Now, I have to have something, remember. So bare minimum, I could say something like, Michael Pollan says, comma, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. I could do that. That's a top piece of bread. It's not a very strong top piece of bread, but it's something. That would be an example of a very minimum way to introduce a quote. So-and-so says, so-and-so states. I actually want you to think beyond says, states, or writes. I want you to think, can you make that verb stronger? Michael Pollan asserts. Michael Pollan argues. Michael Pollan points out. Think about how you can strengthen even just that very basic formula. But I'm going to say, I'm not going to use his name because I can use his name at the end. We're going to talk about that with our bottom piece of bread. So I'm going to say, one noted food theorist. Now, remember, I'm still wanting this to be the strongest top piece of bread that it can be. So instead of just saying says, I want to actually forecast for my reader where I'm going. That's another thing that can go in your top piece of bread. Forecast, predict, set your reader up to know what you're talking about. So instead of one noted food theorist says, eat food, not too much, mostly plants, I, as the writer, am thinking, okay, what is he actually doing here? What he's actually doing, what he's giving, are his 3 rules for healthy living, for healthy nutrition. So I'm going to say that for my reader. I'm going to give that background information to my reader in my top piece of bread, so when they get to the quote, they know exactly what they're looking at and they're not confused. So I'm going to say, one noted food theorist gives 3 rules for healthy eating. Okay? It's a pretty strong top piece of bread because now my reader understands where I'm going with this quote. Usually you introduce a quote with a comma. In this case, I'm actually giving 3 rules, which is a list, so I'm going to use a colon. But you have to have some mechanic there. You have to have a comma or a colon to introduce your quote if your quote is a sentence or a longer clause. If it's just a word or 2 or 3 words, then sometimes you can just intersperse it. You can just work it into your sentence. So here's a top piece of bread. This is not the only top piece of bread that's acceptable, and this is where you get to bring your background, your thoughts, your writing, your knowledge, your skills to this. And also, I want to make sure you're using those templates from They Say, I Say. Those templates are set up for you, not plagiarism. You're not plagiarizing when you're using them. They're given to you. They're moves that writers make. They're given to you to college up your writing, to make your writing more academic. So in chapter 3 of They Say, I Say, you have numerous templates to help make your quotation sandwiches stronger. And I want you to use those templates. I want you to find the one that works for you in each situation. And I want you to try at least one template for your quotation sandwiches and at least one template for your, from chapter 4 for your thesis statement. So I'm really wanting to encourage you when I'm reading your drafts, your first and your final drafts of your essay, I'm really wanting to see those templates. You don't have to highlight them for me, point them out to me. I'm very familiar with them, and I'm going to see them, and I'm going to know that you were able to use that to help college up your own writing. So one noted food theorist gives 3 rules for healthy eating. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. So there's a top piece of bread for us. So again, in my top piece of bread, I'm introducing my author in one way or another, either by name or by credentials. I'm maybe giving credentials, giving background, and then I'm predicting, forecasting where I'm going. I'm helping my reader understand how this ties into my topic sentence of my paragraph. If this quote does not support your topic sentence, which is the main point of your whole paragraph, I'm going to recommend for you all that you have your topic sentence be the first sentence of every paragraph. So when your reader is reading, when they read the first sentence of the paragraph, they know exactly what the point of that whole paragraph is. And then this quote should support that point. If it doesn't support that point, it was not a well-selected quote. Remember, this is your paper, so you don't want to give it away to someone else. You don't want to have a string of quotations. You don't want to say quote, 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 quote. You want quotes to be carefully, carefully, carefully selected to support what you're saying, to support your points. So if this quote doesn't back up your topic sentence, then it does not need to be included in that paragraph. So in our top piece of bread, we're predicting, we're forecasting, we're showing how something is tied to our topic sentence. So one noted food theorist gives 3 rules for healthy eating. That's my top piece of bread. Then here's my quote: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Now I need a bottom piece of bread. Bare minimum in my bottom piece of bread, I have to have the mechanics. So the first thing I have to have is I have to have that parenthetical citation. Anytime you use a quote or a paraphrase, you have to cite it. So here's how I do that parenthetical citation. Parentheses, this is the simple format for a parenthetical citation. It can vary depending on what information you do or do not have. So here I'm going to use the author's last name, which is Pollen. And I'm going to use the page I got that quote from, which I believe is 440. You might double check me on that if you use this quote. Pollen, 440. And then I have my period outside of my parentheses. Notice I do not have my period after plants. I have my period outside my parentheses. That's intentional. That's MLA formatting, is that I don't put the punctuation mark inside the quotation mark in this case only. Usually I do. But for the case of parenthetical citations, it goes outside of my parentheses. Now, many of you, and what I used to do as a writer, is I would stop. Like, boom, I introduced my quote, I cited my quote, done. That's what I used to do, because I would find a quote that said exactly what I wanted to say, and I would use it, and then I would move on to my next paragraph, my next point. That's actually not very effective. It's not the most effective way to use a quote. Because remember, I have to have a bottom piece of bread. In the bottom piece of bread goes my parenthetical citation, yes, but that's not it. You need to do something else. There are some excellent templates in They Say I Say to help you with your bottom piece of bread particularly. So what can you do? You can interpret this quote. You can apply this quote to your point. What do you want your reader to get from this quote? Right now I have a sentence that flows nicely. One noted food theorist gives 3 rules for healthy eating. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Okay, and so what? How does that support your point? How does that support your argument? What do you want your reader to do with those rules? How do you interpret those rules? If the rules were complicated, you might say something like, in other words, the author is stating blah, blah, blah. But in this case, it's a very simple quote, so you don't need to restate it, although that is one option for a bottom piece of bread, is to restate the quote in your own words. You have a template for that, and They Say I Say. Here, you don't need to restate it, but you need to interpret it, and you need to apply it. How is this going to support the point that you're making in your paragraph? You know, without having an actual topic sentence and an actual paragraph, it's difficult to say, but it could be something like, one noted food theorist gives 3 rules for healthy eating. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. In giving these rules, Pollen is cutting to the very heart of health problems and obesity problems in the United States, period. Processed foods, which are not real foods, are so ubiquitous that it's difficult to follow these rules. Whatever, etc., etc., etc. Your own words, your own argument, your own writing, which is what needs to happen now. Remember, quotes need to be carefully selected, and they need to be used sparingly to support your writing and your points. So, top piece of bread, we've talked about what can go in that. Bottom piece of bread, we're talking about our parenthetical citation goes in there. Our actual mechanics, our end of our quotation mark, our actual parentheses, and our period goes in there. And then we interpret, we apply. Sometimes we restate in our own words. And we make sure that we make the connection extremely clear. If we didn't in our top piece of bread, in our bottom piece of bread, we make the connection between our quote and our own ideas extremely clear. Please do not assume that your reader will understand what you're thinking if you don't tell him or her. That's what I used to do, and I see a lot of students do that as well. Someone will lay out A, B, C, and then they'll walk away. What you need to do is you need to say A, B, C, therefore D, and the D is your point. The D is really the heart of what you're saying. Make sure you actually say it so that your reader can get it. So I hope that was helpful for you, that little lecture on quotation sandwiches. Remember, I recommend in any piece of academic writing you do for the rest of your academic career, anytime you use a quote or paraphrase from an outside source, you always, always, always build a quotation sandwich around it. Now I want to transition and talk to you just a little bit about where we're at in our course right now. There's a lot going on. We're really focusing on the process of writing right now, and that's intentional. Writing is a process. No one, me included, no one sits down and just writes something amazing the first time they start writing. What research has shown us time and time again is the longer amount of time that students spend in the process of writing, the stronger their final product will be. So we have a lot of process happening right now. I recommend that you go in the order that it's set up in the module. So you start with your thesis statement. which is built on around chapter 4 of They Say, I Say. So you've read that, you've thought about it, you've done some brainstorming, you've taken some notes, you've done some free writing, you've maybe started an outline, maybe you've started gathering quotes from 2 of the 3 articles we've read in They Say, I Say, the Pollen, the Orbach, and the Zenzinko articles. You choose 2 of those that you're going to focus on and weave in with your own thoughts, experiences, life, and you're going to make an argument based on that. So don't imagine that you'll just sit down and write an amazing thesis statement. Spend some time before you go to the thesis statement discussion board, gathering your thoughts and taking notes and writing things down. And it can be messy and all over the place because it's your pre-writing process. So start gathering your ideas. Part of your pre-writing process is participating in the thesis statement discussion board. You're getting that feedback from fellow students on your thesis statement. And then please remember, the whole point of that is use that feedback. Use the information that your fellow students give you to revise, make your thesis statement stronger, and then that's the thesis statement you'll use in your first draft when you get to that. So do the thesis statement discussion board, and then do the quotation sandwich discussion board. Based on the information that we just talked about right now, I want you to find one of the quotes, have a topic sentence. What's the point of your paragraph going to be? Have a quote that supports that topic sentence, and then build your paragraph. I want to see one of your body paragraphs. Really, I want to see your quotation sandwich. But if I were you, I would be thinking about it in terms of where am I going with this paragraph. Don't just randomly write a quotation sandwich. I want it to be in the context of one of your points. I want it to help you. Because then you're already going to have a thesis statement and you have basically a body paragraph written. And that's part of your process. Then you just extend that. Maybe you just need to write one more paragraph and you're at your page and a half, double-spaced MLA formatting, and then you have your rough draft. Doesn't have to be complete, doesn't need to be perfect. A lot of times students will not participate in peer review because they feel like their writing isn't perfect or because they procrastinated. Please don't fall into either of those traps. Again, no one's writing is going to be perfect. This is a drafting process. So you put something up there, you get feedback on it, and you revise. You take the feedback from actual readers. This is a chance to have actual readers reading your paper and say, I'm confused about this. And then you get to go back and you get to clarify it before you turn it in for a grade. Everyone wants to make his or her writing stronger. Everyone wants to get a better grade. This is a way to do that. This is an opportunity to get actual readers giving you feedback. You, of course, get to choose what feedback do you use and what feedback do you not use. But please go look at every single thing that people say to you and consider incorporating that to make your writing stronger. So when it comes to peer review, you're posting your draft, and then you're taking a significant amount of time to give feedback to at least 2 of your peers. Reading what they write actually helps you make your own writing stronger as well. So this whole process, although it's time-consuming and although it's challenging, it's put together in a way to build scaffolding for you so that you're building your essay as you go through this process. And by the time all of that happens, you take the feedback from your peers, from the peer review, you revise. You have almost a whole week to revise before you're turning your essay in for a grade. So you've gotten a significant amount of input from others before you're at the point where you're getting graded for your work. And so all of that is set up intentionally. So I know it's kind of a lot of work, and I know it can be challenging, but I want you to really plug into this process. I want you to focus on what we're doing this week, and I want you to focus on these due dates, these deadlines. You have a Friday deadline and then a Sunday deadline, like always. And it's a little bit challenging because they're overlapping, but I would go in order. I would do thesis statement, quotation sandwich, and then I would do my first draft for my peer review. But again, you need to meet the deadlines, but that's the order that I would go in if I were you, that I would suggest that you go in order to build the strongest essay that you can. So thank you for all of your questions. Thank you for your participation in the course so far. You all are doing a really nice job. Thank you for the questions you're asking in the Around the Water Cooler discussion board. If you haven't taken a look at there, or if you haven't posted there, remember that that's there for all of us, and we will all want to check in often and see what questions are being asked and answered there. And of course, feel free to email me. Let me know if you need additional help. Okay? Happy writing. I'm really enjoying reading what you're doing, and I look forward to reading your drafts. Thanks.